Well, good evening, Little Masters, and welcome to episode 283 of the Prancing Pony podcast, where I bid farewell to the Nerd of the Rings. His service has been short, and now it is drawing to an end.
I see, and I should just now go and die in what way seems best to me.
If that's what you want, man.
I prefer not, but... Folks, pull up a bench in the common room and join us. I'm Matt, the Nerd of the Rings, and I'm here with the man of the West, who thinks the Heathen Kings of Old are getting a bad rap, Alan Sisto.
You know, actually, that sounds like a great name for a rock band, you know?
It
now
does.
Opening for Metallica, the Heathen Kings of Old. Folks, join us as Denethor despairs, Pippin persuades, Baragond is bewildered, and Grond crawls on. In the last of our 5 episodes on the Siege of Gondor, the 4th chapter in the Return of the King, and the last, for now at any rate, of Matt's time here on the Prancing Pony podcast.
Yeah, and Alan, I have to say it's been an absolutely wonderful time, and thank you for having me on. And yeah, I love that we've been doing the Siege of Gondor between, you know, our segments with Bret and just diving into such a rich chapter with a lot of things going on.
Yeah, it really has been fun. I'm glad you've been here for me. Here at the end of all things.
Now, folks, some of you are hearing this podcast for the very first time, and to you, we bid a very warm welcome. Here at the Prancing Pony podcast, we are reading, talking, speculating, and often joking our way through Middle-earth a few pages at a time.
Yeah, we take a deep dive into the lore. We explore how the story came to be. We talk about our favorite themes and a whole lot more.
But in a lighthearted and fun way, like friends chatting at the pub. And we're glad you've joined us.
And I'm sure you'll be glad you joined as well. But before we get to tonight's discussion, it's time to take a close look at a book that we have both recently enjoyed in a new Kingly Gifts segment. Matt, take it away.
Today on our Kingly Gifts segment, we're taking a quick look at the latest collection of Tolkien's writings to be published in the form of last November's The Fall of Númenor.
Yeah, now, for those unsure what this collection is, and I understand if you do because it's a little confusing, we're going to fill you in. There were a lot of assumptions floating around when this book was released, and we really do want to clear that up. First up, this book is not new original writings, and Amazon's Rings of Power show has absolutely nothing to do with the content within the book, much to their dismay, much to their disadvantage. What would you say?
I think it's just a separate thing, and we'll just leave it at that.
Fair enough.
The literary world is its own thing, and that's where this lives. Now, as for what this book is, it's a collection of previously published Tolkien writings about the Second Age. And I had the pleasure of speaking with the editor of this book, Brian Sibley, and what he's done is taken everything Tolkien wrote about the Second Age, writings about the Rings of Power, the Fall of Númenor, the early days of places like Gondor, Arnor, Lindon, and Rivendell, and put them into in-world chronological order and published them in the form of the Fall of Númenor book. And Brian's own commentary fills the gaps, giving us great insight and context behind Tolkien's writings. And while this is a great way for new people to dive into Tolkien's Second Age, I think folks like you and I, Alan, who are constantly researching Tolkien's writings are going to be the most excited about this release.
Without a doubt. I mean, among the reasons this book is such a big deal, at least for me, is the fact that Tolkien's writings about the Second Age are otherwise very scattered. Mm-hmm. It's safe to say we both have had a lot of folks in the run-up to Rings of Power asking, hey, what should I read in order to learn about the Second Age? And the answer was, well, complicated and a lot, really. I mean, before this book, you had to own The Lord of the Rings, The Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales, The Nature of Middle-earth, the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien, and several volumes from the history of Middle-earth.
Yeah, so when I would research for a video on the Second Age, you know, you'd have to try to recall where the writings were.
Seriously.
If I wanted to do a video on Númenor, or I'm sure if you wanted to research something for the podcast about Númenor, you have to think, okay, wait, is that in the Silmarillion or was that in Unfinished Tales?
Exactly.
I think Tolkien said something about that in one of his letters. It was just kind of a mess.
It really was. It had never been pulled together in one single place. And that's what Brian did. And he did a fantastic job.
Yeah.
As frankly, we would have expected nothing less. Brian Sibley, underestimated, in my opinion, underappreciated in the Tolkien fandom, did an absolutely amazing job bringing this all together in chronological order, regardless of the source. Really, really great stuff.
And if that name sounds a bit familiar to you guys, for those of you who aren't familiar with Brian's work, he was the co-writer of the BBC radio drama back in 1981 that, for my money, is the most faithful Tolkien adaptation. So I'll just leave it at that.
Yep.
But he also did a lot of the tie-in books that went with the Peter Jackson trilogies for both The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. So he's been in and around the fandom for decades now. And I really loved seeing that he was going to be the editor of this book.
Agreed. He's also an incredibly nice guy.
Yeah. One of the nicest. Yeah.
Seriously. I mean, the Tolkien fandom is filled with people like that, but he might be right there among the very best in terms of just being super kind and just the kind of guy you just sit down and talk with. He's just friendly as can be.
Yeah, I talked to him for 3 hours when I interviewed him. I told him we would be around 60 to 90 minutes, and we just kept rolling. And I ended up talking to the guy for 3 hours.
I believe it.
Just on camera. And then off camera, we talked some more. Like, he's just one of the nicest guys. So to see this book receive so well, I just absolutely love that for him. Very happy for him, Another person who we obviously both have a lot of respect for in the Tolkien community is John Garth. So you know, he actually wrote a review about the book, and he had this great quote about the book. He says, "Most of the mortal players rise and return to dust in a page or two. Yet this is a literary strength because mortality itself is the undertow drawing Númenor slowly but inexorably toward disaster." Ooh. And I just love, like, it's great. You know, Tolkien's world is so great that even the reviews end up having quotes about the books that are just so wonderful. The works inspire some incredible writing, and certainly John is a master of that. There's no doubt about it. Now, of course, there's no shortage of reviews covering the Fall of Númenor, but the one that I just mentioned, I think, would be really helpful for folks if you're wanting to learn more about this release and if it's something you're interested in. So check out John Garth's review. That was published in The Guardian. Yeah. Now, in that review, John calls the Fall of Númenor, well, a palate cleanser. You know, we talked about this with him actually back in 278 with the last episode I did with James Tauber. And we actually discussed this a little bit. He hails both the writings within and the artwork that's also in the book, which, by the way, is all from Alan Lee. And Garth says, it's physically beautiful and sometimes overwhelming in its power. This book is a grand compendium of all Tolkien said about the period when the foundations of the Lord of the Rings are laid. We actually asked him a question about that quote in episode 278. So if you're just listening to this now and you want to learn more, there's a good 10, 12-minute discussion about that with him just a few weeks back. And obviously, I'm a big fan of this book. I think Alan is as well, for the many reasons that we laid out. And like John says, it's great for exploring those foundations of the story of the Lord of the Rings, which I'm sure is an exercise listeners of the PPB will no doubt be familiar with. Absolutely. Now, before we get to our reading and discussion for tonight, we want to welcome back to the common room for one more visit, Dr. Bret Devereaux. Well, folks, for the last 2 weeks, we have had the privilege of being joined by Bret Devereaux, military and ancient historian and author of a collection of unmitigated pedantry. We are so happy to have him join us one more time. Bret, welcome back.
Thanks for having me. Good to be back.
Now, the first thing we learned in tonight's reading is that the river has been bridged. So talk to us about the historical importance of bridging rivers and why this is really bad news for Minas Tirith.
Yeah, bridging rivers is hard. Bridging large rivers is something the Romans would actually do as like a big flex. Julius Caesar gets out to the Rhine and he bridges it just to show that he can.
Of course.
Marches his army over the bridge, does some desultory military activity, marches back and disassembles the bridge behind him. And so, you know, right, it requires a lot of engineering, which obviously has been going on, right? Presumably the process of bridging this river, because the bridges that originally crossed the Anduin and Osgiliath have been destroyed in previous military activity. So the process of bridging this river probably began the moment the crossing was won, and it's now been completed. And the downside, if you are the defenders, right, is that this now means that your enemy has an open road to you. So presumably up until this point, the equipment that is being brought to the siege has had to be ferried in boats. And so we might imagine the throughput here is pretty limited. Some of the heaviest equipment can't come. Now that the river is bridged, the heaviest equipment is moving down open roads. The enemy has lots of reinforcements. And so the attack is likely to intensify, which, given the rough straits that the outer defenses of Minas Tirith are already in, the city is on fire, things are not great. The idea that essentially that was just, the enemy's jab, and now here comes the big right hook is like, this is real bad news.
Right. That is bad news. But you're right. I mean, Grond isn't making it across on a couple of ferry boats.
No.
So, yeah. Well, we get news that the assault itself, the main assault, is beginning in the middle of the night, and that the enemy forces are advancing reckless of loss, is the phrase that Tolkien uses. Is this an indication of their confidence in the way that they've softened up Minas Tirith's defenses, or is this more the Witch King simply treating his troops like cannon fodder, which of course they really are?
I mean, I think a little bit of both.
Okay.
I think that, we are told that in many places there are just no bowmen left on the walls. That they can advance. At the same time, around the gate, the defense is still stout and the losses are heavy, and they just keep pushing on anyway. The Witch King has the troops to expend in this way, and he's going to do it. It really feels like this is, again, one of those moments where the First World War is coming through to us. That these sort of repeated attacks at heavy losses against defenses, and often, as a side note, spoiling attacks. This is a situation where, in the First World War, you may have a major offensive that you're aiming at one point in the enemy's line. But the moment you start that, they're going to begin moving reserves. So you need attacks that are designed to force the enemy reserves to stay put or consume them in other fights. And so soldiers might be assigned to charge and die for attacks. They obviously don't know this, for attacks that are never intended to succeed. But are necessary.
So sort of the opposite of a sortie. You talked about with a sortie, the idea is to make sure that you come back.
Right.
This is like, I don't care if you come back. Your dying is serving a function.
Yeah, your attack is going to fail. I have no intention of supporting it. It is, the fancy term, a demonstration. And so it's going to soak up enemy reserves and reinforcements and force them to stay put. And you would often wage these spoiling attacks on the flanks of the area you were actually focused on. So you would have these quote-unquote supporting actions where you had no intention of that attack having permanent success. It was necessary for another attack you hope to succeed. Of course, this being the First World War, that other attack also probably fails. But once again, it's a situation where the decision to make those spoiling attacks is not insane. It is strategic. In some cases, it was frankly necessary, but it requires a degree of bloodlessness and callousness, as war often does. This is, the nature of actual war, unlike the movies, is that occasionally men must be sent to die for no purpose. And that's sort of brutal. Now, the Witch King kind of dials it up to 11 here. And is clearly he does not care. He has a whole reserve army behind this army coming up, which I suspect the purpose of that army is as an exploitation force because it's much more mobile. That would make a lot of sense. And he has such numerical advantage that what's the point? And so he has all of these assaults all along the walls, which he knows are going to fail. Their purpose is to fail. Their purpose is to force the enemy to defend against them. And that is all they're supposed to do. And so, the casualties of point, I don't expect you to win, whatever. So long as you've got their attention.
All right, Bret. Siege towers, go.
The general popular understanding of siege towers is that they're used to get onto the tops of walls. That's what they do in movies. That's what they do in the Lord of the Rings, Peter Jackson films. They roll up to the wall, the drawbridge goes down, you charge over. Siege towers can work like this. They do sometimes. For instance, the siege tower that breaches the defenses of Jerusalem in the First Crusade does, in fact, provide access to the wall. But the more common use of siege towers is to get a height advantage on the defenders and to engage the defenders. Its job is to overawe the wall so that you can build a platform, because the way a defensive wall is constructed is it's not flat on the top, right? You have firing positions protected by what are called crenellations. That's the sort of sawtooth pattern that you get on the top of the wall. And so if you're trying to shoot arrows or throw things or what have you from the base of the wall, you're in the open, unprotected. Your opponent is both above you, which is an advantage, and behind cover.
Right.
So you're just going to lose. What a siege tower lets you do is you can push that up to the wall. You can put your archers or javelin men or what have you in the siege tower up at the top. They can now shoot down at the wall because they're above it.
So now you've reversed the advantage. You've given them a situation where they've got cover and the height advantage.
And ideally, in most sieges, what you're hoping to do is that you're going to push enemies away from that part of the wall. You're going to create a section of the wall that is suppressed, that is unguarded. And then you can maybe use the siege tower to access the wall. You maybe bring up ladders. In the ancient world, often what you're actually doing, because especially with the Romans with sieges, they like to be a little extra. The Romans will actually just build a ramp all the way up the wall.
Oh, yeah, like an earthworks, right?
An earthworks, just ramps. Yeah. And so the siege tower is protecting the construction of this ramp. In this case, of course, what the siege towers are doing is they're pinning and engaging the Gondorian defenders so that they cannot respond to the critical attack at the gate.
Okay.
Which is part of why, in the movie, there's all this fighting on the wall.
Right.
When you read the passage, the siege towers come up and they advance, but then there's no effort to put troops on the wall with them because that's not what their purpose is. Their purpose is to force the defenders to defend against them. To drive
off those defenders that might otherwise be able to protect at the gate.
Right. And to push them, as we're told many of them are, to push them into the second layer of the city's defenses.
Right.
So that the strongest outer layer can be taken more easily.
Okay. That makes sense. Well, later, as Denethor is preparing to take his own life and that of Faramir, Pippin and Baragon have a conversation. Pippin says, "You must choose between orders and the life of Faramir. I think you have a madman to deal with, not a lord." Now, the loyalty of a soldier like Baragon and the years of service as a man of arms of the guard of the Tower of Gondor would make going against authority like Denethor possesses difficult. Talk to us about the maybe ingrained respect for authority in the chain of command and how hard it would be for somebody like Baragon to do what he's going to end up doing later on in a different chapter.
Yeah. This requires, I think, at least briefly talking about kind of the structure of what we see of the Gondorian military, because there are definitely different kinds of soldiers here. Most of our Gondorian soldiers seem to be, I think, what we would describe as part-timers. We have the troops coming in from the fiefs far away that are often described as like, here are the fisher folk from wherever. But Baragon is a tower guard. These are clearly professionals. They occupy a position of high status. They are the elite. They're clearly very disciplined. They have excellent equipment. And so I think we can imagine, right? And he has been in this position for a long time. And he is an important person in this position. And so this is going to be very ingrained with him. And of course, the impact also of this command, right? Denethor is not merely his superior officer, as it were, right? But also his civilian leader. Baragon has been obeying this man's orders since he was an infant, right? For his whole life, this man has been in charge. And so, the psychological pressure to just follow orders, right? And that will be a defense. One of the things that is incredibly difficult in warfare is you have situations where, in order to make an army controllable and to a degree predictable to its commanders, you have both the structure of command and you also have what we'll often refer to as doctrine, the way the army expects to function, and the various rules. And what you quickly learn in an institution like this is that if you follow orders and doctrine, even if things go badly, you always have the defense of, I did what I was told and I followed the field manual. And that will be a defense of your conduct. And so when you have a moment where someone needs to throw the field manual out and needs to recognize that the letter of the orders they were given is not the same as what they need to be doing in this moment, right? That involves tremendous personal risk. So it requires not only breaking a habit in that moment, you're really going out on a limb. If this doesn't work, you will be severely punished.
Killed, no doubt, in Baragon's case, yeah.
Yeah, and so all of that comes together, at once, and I think it tells us something about Baragon's character that, he's extremely reluctant, and his response is more or less, well, I'm going to go see what's happening.
Yeah, at this point, he's not there yet, yeah.
But when he goes and sees what's happening, he recognizes what must be done. again, The Lord of the Rings is so much about character studies, about doing the right thing more than winning. The moral victory is more meaningful than the physical victory. And so Baragond gets there, he sees what's going on, and he does the right thing. And this has obviously a sort of measurable positive effect, right? The victory of the good guys in this story is the result of a dozens and dozens of moments where they did the right thing, more than it is the result of swords or spears or arms. And sort of Baragond is like one of these moments.
It really is. It puts me in mind of a number of those moments, like Faramir not immediately killing Frodo and Sam, when he encounters them at Ithilien against the orders. Eomer's orders, of course, to kill anybody who's not, from Rohan there. He should have wiped out the 3 hunters. Even Hama, the door warden, right? He knows what the orders are, but he still allows Gandalf to come in with his staff. Again, just thinking that the right thing to do is this. And you're right. It's just a compilation of these right things, these right decisions made against orders or against protocol, if you will, that lead to that conclusion. Yeah.
And I almost wonder, of course, Tolkien was, and anyone who's read the foreword knows this, defensive about, like, he's very open about World War I's influence on his work, and he is quite defensive about the idea that World War II had very much influence.
Correct.
But the fact that the day is sort of repeatedly saved, there are repeated moments where it is incredibly important that orders were not obeyed, is really striking in the context of in the late 1940s, where a lot of German officers were standing in front of tribunals and saying, well, I had orders, and orders were orders, and I followed those orders, even though those orders were inhumane, even though they were wrong, even though they in some cases were illegal internationally, if not domestically. And and one wonders if that's a factor here, that Tolkien has essentially asked the question repeatedly: if your orders conflict with the right thing, do the right thing.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because in most cases, the person that violates orders is still punished for the violation of orders, right? Hama gets demoted. Baragond faces consequences as well. That still happens. They don't necessarily get praised and rewarded, and nevertheless, they have done the right thing.
Absolutely.
And Faramir, actually, for that matter, refusing to take the ring, gets blasted by Denethor for it.
Sure does. Yeah. You're absolutely right.
Now, soon we see the arrival of the Mumakil, the huge elephant cavalry of Harad. Here they're used for dragging siege engines. Later we'll see them with several archers mounted on each one. Can you tell us a little bit about the real-world use of war elephants compared to their use here?
Yeah, so now I have to think. I cannot think of any examples where war elephants are used to move siege equipment. Elephants are not always the most cooperative of creatures, so I would probably use other draft animals were it me. And of course, this comes up in the text because the Mumakil occasionally go berserk and just smash into their own dudes. This is absolutely a thing that would happen. As a side note, there are multiple battles in the ancient world where one side or other achieves success by driving the war elephants of their enemy back through their own ranks. That is absolutely a thing that could happen. Elephants are pretty terrifying on the battlefield. Obviously, they're big. I mean, I think we're given the sense that the Mumakil are even bigger than the elephants that we have. Though I should note for listeners, when you're thinking war elephants, do not be thinking the largest African elephants. African bush elephants are not tameable. You need to be thinking of the somewhat smaller Indian elephant. It's still really big, right? It's still the size of a truck.
Yeah, exactly.
Elephants are extraordinarily dangerous on the battlefield because, unlike, say, horses, which are often more of a conveyance, the elephant is a combatant. It is actively trying to kill the enemy. With tusks and trunk, elephants will crush, they will rip, they will tear, they will throw. An elephant's trunk is powerful enough to lift someone, a human, off the ground and throw them. Elephants are yikes. And then, of course, you can put soldiers on them, although that is really a secondary part of the weapon system. The main threat is the elephant. And so, the use of elephants in battle is really dangerous. In addition, horses that have not been acclimatized to elephants, horse doesn't know what that is, but it knows it's bigger than the horse, so it won't go near.
No.
And so elephants can rout cavalry by their presence. if that cavalry is not. And this is actually one way that some of the armies of Alexander the Great's successors use the elephants that they get from his campaigns in India, is they'll just use it to wall out a cavalry force. This happens at Ipsus, where Demetrius Poliorcetes' cavalry force is just blocked from rejoining the battle by some elephants. And it's like, cheers, you're done. And then the rest of the battle takes place over there because he just can't get back into the fight because his horses will not go near these things.
No. Why would they?
Right. So war elephants are incredibly dangerous. And then, stick a few archers on the back. Why not?
Height, cover. Yeah.
Yeah. There is an interesting sort of, we don't get much of a sense of the Southrons and Easterlings sort of social structure in historical war elephants. The driver of the elephant, the fellow who is actually controlling its movement, is the mahout. He sits on the elephant's neck, right behind its head, controls it with a pair of hooks and kusa. Not the weird earring setup that's in the films. It's different, though. These are nasty hooks, because controlling an elephant sometimes requires inflicting some pain on it.
Not bad.
Yeah, it's a little dicey. The mahout is generally a sort of working class professional. He's not a kind of a common soldier. He has a marketable skill, but he is not an elite. He is not an aristocrat. The aristocrat on the elephant is generally the archer or javelin man that sits on the elephant's back. And so the guy that has all of the really difficult skills of driving the elephant is a workaday sort of fellow.
So you got the NCO is sitting on the neck.
Yes.
And it's the landed guy, the officer, is the one sitting on the top.
Yeah, right. Colonel Do Nothing is back there with his bow plinking at people.
Right.
While I drive this, 5-ton animal war machine into the midst of the enemy.
Turn it left, Jeeves. Turn it left. Yeah.
Driver, take me closer. I want to hit them with my sword.
That's a very long sword indeed. Well, as if these giant elephants weren't bad enough, soon Grond crawls on. A battering ram described as 100 feet long, swung on giant chains with a steel head. Now, this seems like an incredibly effective battering ram. Was it? I mean, after all, it took the Witch King's cries, 3 of them magical in nature to some extent, before the gate broke. Now, talk to us a little bit about battering rams. How much force could a battering ram of that size deliver, and how effective were they in real-world sieges?
So that is larger than any battering ram I am aware of.
That's pretty big. I mean, 30-plus meters long. Imagine that thing. It's a third of a football field in length.
Right. Of course, you have trolls to operate it, so why not?
Why not? Exactly.
Actual battering rams were generally somewhat smaller. Obviously you have everything from the sort of improvised, we have a tree trunk, let's see what we can do with it. So sort of more common, you would build essentially a rolling shed on wheels and suspend the battering ram in the shed so that you had some protection while you're swinging it. We tend to think of battering rams being used against gates, which they could be, but we also hear of battering rams deployed against walls. That's going to be really, really slow, but if you apply repeated concussive force to a wall, it will eventually fall down.
Eventually.
It's not going to be quick, but it will happen. And so these could work. Grond getting the job done in 3 hits is incredibly fast. And presumably it has to do with the fact that, right, it belches fire on every hit. So there's some magic going on here. I always think the description of Grond owes something to actually the Siege of Constantinople in 1453 again, and some of the absolutely ludicrously massive siege artillery that the Ottomans brought to that. Some of their cannon were so large that they had to be essentially suspended in giant wooden frames. We're talking about, double-digit tons of cannon to throw rounds. They're really massive. Siege artillery would have been frightful to look at, overwhelmingly massive guns, and extremely heavy. And so the sort of description of this reminds me of the sort of the Ottoman siege train, which in 1453 was much larger and more extensive than anything in Europe. So any of our European sources, when you're looking at this, they're like, geez, you won't see siege trains of that kind of power in Europe really until the 1490s.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, the Ottomans are a little quicker on the uptake here. They have more state capacity, more money to throw at the problem. And so this kind of overweening siege engine that is just kind of absolutely unstoppable, really strikes me as kind of evocative of that. Like I said, I don't know of an actual ram that's that big, but, rams work. And if your RAM is worked by trolls and magic, it's going to work, even better. I mean, one of the motifs we see kind of repeatedly is that both Saruman's forces and Sauron's forces seem to have access to explosives. And we see sort of blasting fires of various sorts. And whether that's magic or, right, the sort of proto-industrial vibe that they sometimes have, I think is up to interpretation. Obviously, Tolkien wants to kind of contrast between the agrarian and the old and the pure embodied in the Shire, right? And then the industrial, which he views quite negatively, sort of despoiling the English countryside of his childhood. And I think that's also part of this, that this enormous ram is a creature of industry. It's metal tipped. They can't get the frame of it to catch fire. Is that magic, or is that because it's been plated in something? We're not told. And so I think that's the other thing, that this is a creature of industry, and industry is not viewed well in the Tolkien legendarium.
No, not at all. My goodness. Great stuff.
Man, thank you so much, Bret, for you've shed so much light on these things. Like, this has been endlessly fascinating for me.
Really
and I'm sure it is for the listeners as well. And I just absolutely love talking to you and having you with us for these last few weeks.
Thanks for having me. It's great.
It really has been our pleasure. This has been eye-opening. I know our listeners are really enjoying having your expertise and insight into this chapter. I hope you'll be able to join Sean and me when he and I get to the Battle of the Pelennor Fields as well in another couple of months. But in the meantime, thanks again, and know that you are always welcome here at the Prancing Pony Podcast.
Glad to hear it.
Man, it's been fantastic to have Bret join us for this chapter, and I'm looking forward even more now to the Battle of Pelennor Fields.
Oh, same. I cannot wait to have him join us then. And Bret, thank you once more. Now, I know that we keep saying, well, before we get into the text tonight, but there's one more, and this time it is a very important thing. Tonight's episode openly discusses and explores the topic of suicide. It is, of course, an incredibly sensitive matter, and for many, it can be a trigger. Please know that if you are struggling with thoughts of self-harm, help is available. In the U.S., you can dial 988, just like you'd call 911, 24 hours a day. And for other countries, of course, help is available there as well. Please ask for it. We will not be offended if you choose not to listen.
Yeah, and feel free to fast forward parts or even skip this episode altogether if it's too much.
Now, it is time to finish the Siege of Gondor. Matt, would you please start us out this time?
Absolutely. Far behind the battle, the river had been swiftly bridged, and all day more force and gear of war had poured across. Now at last, in the middle night, the assault was loosed. The vanguard passed through the trenches of fire by many devious paths that had been left between them. On they came, reckless of their loss as they approached, still bunched and herded, within the range of bowmen on the wall. But indeed there were too few now left there to do them great damage, though the light of the fires showed up many a mark for archers of such skill as Gondor once had boasted. Then perceiving that the valor of the city was already beaten down, the hidden captain put forth his strength. Slowly the great siege towers built in Osgiliath rolled forward through the dark. Messengers came again to the chamber in the White Tower, and Pippin let them enter, for they were urgent. Denethor turned his head slowly from Faramir's face, and looked at them silently. "The first circle of the city is burning, Lord," they said. "What are your commands? You are still the Lord and Steward. Not all will follow Mithrandir. Men are flying from the walls and leaving them unmanned." Why do the fools fly?" said Denethor. "Better to burn sooner than late, for burn we must. Go back to your bonfire, and I will go now to my pyre. To my pyre! No tomb for Denethor and Faramir. No tomb. No long, slow sleep of death embalmed. We will burn like heathen kings before ever a ship sailed hither from the west. The west has failed. Go back and burn."
Well, Denethor, yeah, Don't mince words, man. How do you really feel?
Yeah, don't sugarcoat it.
Seriously, man. All right, going back to the beginning of this section, and again, I got to tell you, this entire chapter, right, all 5 of these episodes, I don't know how it's been really hard to not read everything, right? To remember that in doing this, I can't do that.
Yeah.
Because every word in this chapter is amazing. So going back to the beginning of the words you read for us, we start with the full assault of the forces of Gondor. And it begins with the fact that the river has been bridged. Now, recall our conversation with Bret just a little bit ago about how important that is in terms of supplies, heavy siege weapons like Grond, and reinforcement. I mean, you're not getting a hmmmmm on a boat, right?
No, absolutely not.
No.
And this all begins in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
And it's important to keep in mind that this is when the Nazgul are at their strongest as well.
That's absolutely right. Okay, so the lead portion of the army here, that's the vanguard, they're navigating between those fire-filled trenches that we talked about, right? The ones that were built to prevent the sorties against the siege engines.
Right, and they're described as being reckless of their loss. And this isn't surprising because, as we know, the Witch King doesn't particularly care about the number of casualties his troops might suffer.
No.
He just cares that objective is achieved.
Yeah, it's true. I don't think he's going to sweat over the fact that he's got to go back to his tent and write letters to the wives of all the dead orc soldiers. In fact, he's probably not going to do that.
I don't think he does.
No. Truth is, though, I can't help but think when I read the phrase reckless of their loss of what some historians call the donkeys who led the lions. I'm talking about the generals who sent thousands of men to their deaths in World War I, with a strategy that was really just pointless because it just led to thousands and thousands of deaths for no gain of anything. Field Marshal Douglas Haig, when he was informed that the first day of casualties on the Somme was estimated to be over 40,000 British soldiers, wrote this in his diary: "This cannot be considered severe in view of the numbers engaged and the length of front attacked." Now, look, and if any of his relatives are still listening, I am not comparing Haig to the Witch King, okay? It's just this reference, this concept of being reckless of loss that I want to get across here with this. Obviously, the Witch King cares a whole lot less. I'm not suggesting that right. Allied generals did not care at all. They just didn't make the changes necessarily. But I think there's a little bit of that hint here.
Yeah. And it's important to note that they're not actually taking much in the way of losses.
True. That's true. They may be reckless of loss, but they're not actually taking any. Yeah.
Yeah, because as we've read, there aren't a lot of archers left on the outer wall. They've been cut off, and many have fled after the fires consumed most of the first circle.
That's right.
And then we see the Witch King, he observes this lack of defense.
Yeah.
And we're told the Captain of Despair sends forward even more strength. Now it's the siege towers.
I want to linger on that a little bit. This observation that the Witch King makes, right? The line says, the valor of the city was already beaten down. Yeah. And it reminds me of that line that we read in the last bit of last week, that the valor of Gondor withered into ash.
Yeah.
And just a couple paragraphs later, we're reading about now the Witch King has perceived the valor is beaten down. It's become obvious even to him.
Yeah, he knows.
Yeah. So like Bret said, these siege engines could carry troops to attack a wall like we see in the Jackson films, but their primary function was actually to carry archers and give them a way to rain arrows and other projectiles down on the troops that were manning the battlements.
Yeah, I feel like Hollywood has lied to me for decades because of that. That was eye-opening for me.
It really, I'm telling you, Bret's stuff is eye-opening, but it does sort of destroy a lot of these film tropes that you're used to. Yeah.
Now, Hammond and Skull point us to the Encyclopedia Britannica and their description of Roman siege towers. Built so high that from their tops, the parapet walk of the wall, the part that was under attack, could be swept with arrows and stones. The height of the towers was from 70 to 150 feet. They were moved on wheels of solid oak or elm, 6 to 12 feet in diameter and 3 to 4 feet thick.
Oh my goodness, a 12-foot diameter wheel that's 4 feet thick. I guess you'd have to if you were moving a 150-foot tall tower.
You would need some big trolls to push that thing.
You would need very, very large trolls. Now, this Encyclopedia Britannica article goes on to talk about the inclusion of a whole lot of things on the middle floors of this. You have battering rams on the lower floors. You have missile engines like ballistae on the upper floors. And then the archers themselves were on the top. These siege towers included big reservoirs of water to put out fires because, of course, the people being besieged would try to light that thing on fire because what better way to get rid of all the archers? And they were then protected against fire as well by using plated rope or animal hides on the front, not solid iron. I don't even want to know how much the siege towers weighed in Jackson's films. With iron plating all the way around. Are you kidding me? Those would sink into the ground.
And Bret also noted, I think, when we weren't recording, the fact that the trolls push those things a long way, fully weighed down with a lot of orcs in them, when you'd probably wait till you got a little closer.
Exactly. You'd push the things to maybe 100 yards away, then you'd load up all the troops, and then you'd push it to the wall. You wouldn't be pushing it all the way from the Anduin, loaded with orcs. Gee, boss, this is really heavy.
We've gone through a dozen trolls already. They just keep dropping. All right. And it's with this background on siege engines that the action shifts back to the chamber in the White Tower as Pippin lets messengers enter for Denethor.
Right.
And they in turn give the update about the lower circle and ask for his commands.
Exactly. I mean, their point is, look, not everybody's following Gandalf. In fact, some people are not following anybody at all. They're just abandoning their posts. And Denethor, we've seen that he's been struggling all along, ever since Faramir's return. But now I think we see for the first time that he is clearly more than just feeling guilt or feeling remorse or feeling sorrow. He is now distraught, and he's frankly beyond reason at this point. This is when we know he started to really lose it. He calls those who are abandoning their posts fools, but not for abandoning their posts, not for, going back on their oath, but because they're running away from an inevitable death.
Yeah.
Like, just get it over with.
Right. Yeah. And he tells the messengers to go back and essentially die.
Yeah.
And he'll repeat this after his little tirade as well, of course.
True.
And this transitions into Denethor seeking his own death and that of Faramir.
Exactly. And he specifically rejects the tradition of Númenor and Gondor here, stating that they will burn like heathen kings before the coming of Númenor to Middle-earth.
Yeah, and Gandalf will confirm in the chapter The Pyre of Denethor that the heathen kings under the domination of the Dark Power were the only ones to kill themselves in pride and despair.
Exactly. And I want to say the usage of heathen here is really significant. It only appears twice in all of Tolkien's published works, and it also shows up in the drafts talking about the heathen fane on the hillside in Harrowdale. That phrase doesn't make it into the finished work. It also appears in the Notion Club papers, but we're going to get to that in the P5 because that would be a really long digression here. But suffice to say that his usage of heathen is very intentional here.
Now, going back to the Second Age, Númenor first came back to Middle-earth in the year 600 of the Second Age as teachers and friends to the men still living there.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be for another 600 years before they started to make their permanent havens, and yet another 600 years after that before they established dominions on the coast and would begin, ultimately, their long fall.
As for the Númenorian tradition, we see the building of elaborate tombs going all the way back to Númenor, and this tradition was continued in Gondor. As Faramir said in The Window on the West, kings made tombs more splendid than houses of the living, and counted old names in the rolls of their descent dearer than the names of sons.
Man, I love that quote. Tolkien himself, of course, talked about this tradition, the elaborate tombs. There were moments. There was a letter where he actually talked about how Númenor was very much like Egypt in this way, right? They were building these massive monuments to the dead and doing things like, well, frankly, mummification, right? Yeah. I think we'll read about that a little bit later on too. So after Denethor declares the West to be a failure, the messengers leave without bowing or speaking. I imagine, frankly, they're at a bit of a loss for words at this point. And we are as well, which is why we're going to take a break. But we'll have more when we come back. Now, before we get back to the text and Denethor's increasing despair, we want to make sure you know that even after you've listened to the episode, there is a lot more talk going on at the Prancing Pony Podcast.
The PPP has an amazing listener community. They're always coming up with great questions and discussions across all our social media spaces. Check out our common room on Facebook, our dedicated subreddit, Twitter, and more.
Now, on Facebook, just search for The Prancing Pony Podcast. Go ahead and follow the page to get our episode releases and news, but be sure to join the group as well to get involved in some great discussions.
Or if you prefer Reddit, find us there at r/PrancingPonyPod. On Twitter and Instagram, we're simply at PrancingPonyPod.
And folks, if you enjoy the PPP, please consider supporting the show by joining the fellowship of the podcast. When you do, you get a lot. You get a really active Discord community that includes live episode recordings like the one we're doing right now, postscripts to the episodes, as well as episodes without digital ads and a whole lot more.
Like free merch and live Discord hangouts. But you can also become part of our Questions After Nightfall episodes, or even join us as a guest in the North Wing. So please go to patreon.com/prancingponypod to show your support and join the fellowship of the podcast.
And you can also help us out by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts and a rating on Spotify. And please recommend us to your friends.
For now, though, let's get back to the text. Alan?
All right. He is burning, already burning, he said sadly. The house of his spirit crumbles. Then, stepping softly towards Pippin, he looked down at him. Farewell, he said. Farewell, Peregrine, son of Paladin. Your service has been short, and now it is drawing to an end. I release you from the little that remains. Go now, and die in what way seems best to you, and with whom you will, even that friend whose folly brought you to this death. Send for my servants, and then go. Farewell. I will not say farewell, my lord, said Pippin, kneeling. And then, suddenly hobbit-like once more, he stood up and looked the old man in the eyes. I will take your leave, sir, he said, for I want to see Gandalf very much indeed. But he is no fool, and I will not think of dying until he despairs of life. But from my word and your service, I do not wish to be released while you live. And if they come at last to the citadel, I hope to be here, and stand beside you, and earn perhaps the arms that you have given me. Do as you will, Master Halfling, said Denethor. But my life is broken. Send for my servants. He turned back to Faramir. Pippin left him and called for the servants, and they came, 6 men of the household, strong and fair, yet they trembled at the summons. But in a quiet voice, Denethor bade them lay warm coverlets on Faramir's bed and take it up. And they did so, and lifting up the bed, they bore it from the chamber. Slowly they paced to trouble the fevered man as little as might be. And Denethor, now bending on his staff, followed them. And last came Pippin.
All right, going back to the beginning of the text here, Denethor observes that Faramir's fever is still burning and that his body is crumbling.
I love the phrase he uses for that, the house of his spirit. It is it's a wonderful phrase, and it's actually a change from the first edition as the book was originally published. It just read, his house crumbles, rather than the house of his spirit. But because that text, his house crumbles, could refer to the line of the House of Stewards as well as his body, Tolkien changed that in the second edition in 1965. But, for the first, 8 years you're reading that book, it's his house crumbles.
Wow.
I love the way this is phrased, though, because it also really calls to mind Tolkien's discussion of the Fëa and the Hroa and how he speaks of elves being rehoused, which, of course, men don't get. But it's still the same concept, the fact that the Hroa, or the body, is the house of the Fëa.
Yeah, it's always interesting when we get these little glimpses into kind of the deeper mythology and, the...
almost the metaphysical stuff. Huh?
Yeah, the metaphysical stuff of Middle-earth, yeah.
Yeah, good stuff, though.
And then we see Denethor looks at Pippin, and he releases him from his service, bidding him farewell and using his formal name and patronymic as he did when he swore him into service.
Yeah, I can see him now, right? Your service has been short, and so are you. Yeah, I don't know. No, he's not going to ding Pippin quite like that. In doing so, though, he tells him to go and die in his own way. And this is just more evidence, right, that he's reached this conclusion that death is now inevitable for everybody. And of course, it's a wrong conclusion. We've talked about this a lot. We're going to keep talking about it. But he's now expecting the messengers to go and die. He's expecting Pippin to go and die. And of course, he's going to kill Faramir as well as himself. Yeah.
Yeah. It gets really bleak here.
Yes, it does.
And he also mentions Gandalf and suggests in a way that Pippin go and die with him.
Yeah.
But he has one last order for Pippin, and that is send for my servants first.
Yeah. Yeah. And we'll eventually see why that is. Now, for the moment, Pippin is not accepting the release from service. And, we've talked about how much he's grown. Here he reveals more of that hobbit toughness or hobbit stubbornness.
Yeah. And think of the bravery that he's displaying here. Denethor is clearly no longer stable and presents a danger to himself and anyone near him. Mm-hmm. And Pippin not only rejects the release, but goes even further and says he hopes he would stand by Denethor at the last, fighting to defend him.
Exactly. He will, of course, still accept the permission to go and see Gandalf, and he's wise about that. And he reminds both Denethor and us as the readers, frankly, that Gandalf is wise and that until and unless he despairs of life, it is simply not time to go. And that brings me right back to one of my absolute favorite lines. It's Gandalf's line about despair that he says in the Council of Elrond, despair is only for those who see the end beyond all doubt.
Oh, I love that.
So
That's
true.
Fantastic.
It
really,
really
is.
It
goes back to that core Tolkien lesson of, always having hope and clinging to whatever sliver of hope there may be. And I absolutely love that. Now, Denethor believes that he does.
Oh, yeah.
That he does see beyond all doubt.
Yeah.
But obviously he is gravely mistaken.
Yeah. And that's what makes this so heartbreaking. I mean, how can anybody truly see the end beyond all doubt? And that's Gandalf's point when he makes that statement. Mm-hmm. And it's the point we're supposed to take as we're looking through that lens on people's actions as they're facing their ends, either certain and beyond all doubt or not. So, Denethor gives him permission to go and then reminds him to send for the servants again. And he makes this really sad declaration that his life is broken.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I want to discuss how Pippin has seriously matured over the course of this story.
Man, hasn't he?
Right. I mean, from the young troublemaker he was before leaving the Shire, and even quite a bit after to who he is here.
Oh, vastly different character, isn't he?
Yeah.
I mean, comparing him to who he was even in Rivendell.
Yeah.
He's radically different now. He's grown so much. I mean, Merry has too, let's face it, but I think Pippin is the one we see have a more dramatic arc in that regard. I think because he starts from even less.
Yeah. And it's something that I love both in the book and in the Peter Jackson adaptations.
That's true.
Is as a representation of this, we not only see Pippin's growth, but we see the way that Gandalf treats Pippin changes, and he kind of acknowledges the growth that Pippin goes through and gives him a little bit more cred. He does.
Forward. You're right. I'm thinking even of that line in the films, because of course it's not in the book, where he's talking with Pippin right before the troll's going to knock that gate down, and he's talking to him about death.
Yeah.
That is a much more serious conversation than Gandalf believed he could have with Pippin when he's threatening to use his head to bash down the doors of Moria.
Yeah.
It does show, you're right, how much Gandalf has observed this growth. And, I think we see the same thing in the books. We really do.
Yeah,
Gandalf is treating him. Certainly, he doesn't call him a fool of a took here. I mean, he does reference, he says, perhaps your foolishness had something to do with Sauron's actions, etc.
Yeah.
And he's still very ticked that Pippin looked at the Palantir last week.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't be? But yeah. Fantastic stuff. I also want to talk about Denethor's decision here, right? This isn't just the despair. We've talked about this from the angle of despair versus hope. But the fact that he has actually abdicated his responsibility. He's broken his oaths. He's allowed this despair to overcome his obligation. That's a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, he desires to die now, but not in an honorable defense of Minas Tirith.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can't help but think of Theoden, right? I mean,
right. the comparisons are amazing between these two characters.
They really are. I mean, he's willing to die on the battlefield, but he's not despairing.
Yeah.
He does it in a way of standing up for Rohan, for their alliance with Gondor. Denethor seeks death as opposed to Theoden, who willingly faces death.
Yeah.
And it's just the difference is so dramatic. And I think even this line, I have to remind myself now, is this a film line or not? I don't think it is. Theoden, when he dies, says, my body is broken. We just saw Denethor say, my life is broken.
Yeah.
There is a radical difference between those two.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll have to remind myself whether that's a film scene line or a book line, but I really, really like that distinction. Yeah.
And that's part of the magic of those films is like, it actually, like it's kind of amazing in retrospect that they're able at times to make us second guess, like, wait, book or film? I can't remember.
I've just confirmed it is a book. It is a book.
I thought it was. Yeah. Now, going back to Pippin here, he leaves and does what he was asked to do, calling Denethor's household servants in, and these 6 young men do as ordered, but they're clearly nervous.
I would be too.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I don't want to go in there.
Yeah. Denethor, I've got to think that, like, other people, it's not just Pippin catching on to, like, okay, our leader's kind of gone off the deep end here, guys.
Yeah.
But Denethor quietly asks them to put covers over Faramir and pick up the bed, which they do, gently carrying him out of the room.
Exactly. And just a real quick mention that a coverlet is a bedspread or a duvet, a comforter, that sort of thing. So Denethor and Pippin follow the servants as they leave. Denethor already now leaning on his staff.
Yeah, and in the part that we skipped, we read that they leave the White Tower into the night. Note the reflection of the fires from the Pelennor fields on the clouds.
Oh, I know. Isn't that kind of creepy, right? The red on the bottom of the clouds.
Yeah. And they, of course, stop briefly at the withered tree.
They do. And that gives us a chance to talk a little bit about the tree itself. This is, of course, the third white tree of Gondor. The first white tree came from the fruit that Isildur took from Nimloth the Fair, one of my favorite moments.
Oh, yeah.
I love that. While still in Númenor, right? Before Nimloth was destroyed by Sauron and its wood used to, start fires that were used to sacrifice people. I mean, it just brutal stuff in that story. And that seedling was then brought to Middle-earth and planted in Minas Ithil. But when Sauron captured Minas Ithil in 3429 of the Second Age, he, of course, burned that tree.
Yeah. And the second white tree came from a sapling that Isildur took with him before the capture of Minas Ithil. So Isildur is really good at rescuing saplings, guys. That's the moral of the story.
He's an amateur arborist. Yeah, yes, he's really good at this.
So he plants that in Minas Anor, which would become Minas Tirith later, the city that we know and we're talking about here. He plants that in memory of his brother Anarion, who, of course, dies in the War of the Last Alliance. And this tree lasted until the Great Plague in 1636 of the Third Age, which killed the then king Telimnar and his children. So this tree in our current story that we're talking about right now is the third white tree. That was planted in 1640 of the Third Age by King Tarondor, and it died in 2872, not quite 150 years ago.
Okay, so there's a little history on your white trees. And of course, spoiler alert, we will get a fourth white tree.
That's right.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, I remember, okay, so this is a little bit of a digression, but I remember when I first read The Lord of the Rings, given the time frame in which I read it, which would have been the mid to late 80s, I read the paperback edition that had the Daryl Sweet covers. And if you remember, the Return of the King cover is a spoiler alert in a huge way.
I know exactly the image you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the book has a red cover on it, and then the picture is of Gandalf and Aragorn walking up Mount Mindalluin in the snow. There's snow on the ground, and Aragorn is finding that small seedling. It's such a cool moment, and man, I remember those artworks so vividly.
Yes, they have such a unique style to them too.
Oh, absolutely. Sweet was fantastic. Yeah, I mean, okay, the feather in the helm was a little odd to me, I suppose, but
there's some extravagance with helms and stuff like that. The
Fellowship of the Ring cover where they're standing in front of the doors of Moria, another just
yes,
fantastic piece. Yeah. That was such a great set of pieces of art on those covers. There was a 4-piece box set that was a Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. I actually didn't get that. I didn't have that Hobbit. I had the Rankin and Bass animated Hobbit book. So it had, stills from the film. So for the very longest time, I had some really wacky images of what things are supposed to look like.
You had Smaug with like sideburns.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So then when I read Lord of the Rings, it was the Sweet edition. And I did end up getting the same edition, so to speak, the same set of the Silmarillion, which had a gold cover and had this amazing illustration of the Fall of Númenor by Sweet. I've been looking for a set of those in good condition ever since. I can't find them because mine crumbled to dust.
Yeah. I love that. That's such a unique thing about the Tolkien fandom because it's been around for so long that, you can measure how long someone has been a fan by what edition was the first one that they read.
Absolutely right. Yeah. Yeah.
So like there's people, it's like, oh yeah, I read the ones that have the Peter Jackson films on them or whatever.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. And in the future, we're going to find people who first bought books of the Lord of the Rings that have the stills, the close up of the hands from the Rings of Power. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And mine were like it was an edition that I don't know what year it came out exactly, but it was, it was in the bookstore when The Two Towers was in theaters. That's all I know. But it has nice Alan Lee illustrations on it.
I know which one you're talking about.
Yeah, and so I feel really good about my first Tolkien book selection.
It wasn't the Ace paperback,
it was
or the one that had the emus on it. Oh man, what was?
Yeah,
because that was not the Ace paperback. The Ace paperback actually had really cool covers, I thought, but I can't remember the emu. The poor gal, though, did not actually read the books, and she had such a short time to do the commission. And we need to do a whole separate Kingly Gift segment on cover art one of these days.
Oh
That's
my gosh,
going to be what I'm going to do now. All right,
there's those ones that look like they're from like soap operas or something.
You'll have to send me that stuff later. Seriously, we will. Let's do that. We'll do a Kingly Gift segment. Maybe we can even do it on your show because yours is video, and we can actually use the covers.
We could actually show it. Yeah,
that would be cool. Let's do that. Let's do that. All right, folks, stay tuned. All right. That digression is complete. And we're going to come back to the scene where they stop at the tree. And as everything is quiet, other than the sound of the war 700 feet below them on the plain, they can hear this sad drip, drip of the water from the dead branches into the pool below. Man. Yeah. And with that, I'm going to have you skip, about 2 paragraphs or so, maybe a paragraph and a half. You're going to pick up with when they turn westward.
Turning westward, they came at length to a door in the rearward wall of the 6th circle. Fen Hallen it was called, for it was kept ever shut save at times of funeral, and only the lord of the city might use that way, or those who bore the token of the tombs and tended the houses of the dead. Beyond it went a winding road that descended in many curves down to the narrow land under the shadow of Mindolluin's precipice, where stood the mansions of the dead kings and of their stewards. A porter sat in a little house beside the way, and with fear in his eyes he came forth bearing a lantern in his hand. At the Lord's command he unlocked the door and silently swung it back, and they passed through, taking the lantern from his hand. It was dark on the climbing road between the ancient walls and the many-pillared balusters looming in the swaying lantern beam. Their slow feet echoed as they walked down, until at last they came to the silent street. Rath Dinan. Between pale domes and empty halls, and images of men long dead, and they entered into the house of the stewards, and set down their burden. There Pippin, staring uneasily about him, saw that he was in a wide vaulted chamber, draped as it were with the great shadows that the little lantern threw upon its shrouded walls. And dimly to be seen were many rows of tables, carved of marble, and upon each table lay a sleeping form, hands folded, head pillowed upon stone. But one table near at hand stood broad and bare. Upon it, at a sign from Denethor, they laid Faramir and his father side by side, and covered them with one covering, and stood then with bowed heads as mourners beside a bed of death. Then Denethor spoke in a low voice. "Here we will wait," he said, "but send not for the embalmers. Bring us wood quick to burn, and lay it all about us, and beneath, and pour oil upon it. And when I bid you thrust in a torch, do this, and speak no more to me. Farewell." "By your leave, lord," said Pippin, and turned and fled in terror from the deathly house.
Yeah, I might do the same thing.
Yeah.
Isn't that a Harry Potter title, by the way? Fled in terror from the deathly house? It just sounds something like it.
There's the Deathly Hallows.
Deathly Hallows, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, that tells you how much I know about that particular fandom. All right, so wow, what an incredible place. The sense that you're picking up here is really, really heavy.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the beginning of the passage that you read. They continue on through the gate to the citadel level, much to the shock of the sentinel.
And they head toward a rarely used door at the back of the 6th level of the city, and it's called Fen Hallen.
Now, that is Sindarin for closed door or shut door, according to words, phrases, and passages from, you guessed it, folks, Parma El Delamberon, number 17. I should mention, by the way, every time I say that, people say Parma what? Or Elda what? Because I'm not saying it clearly enough. Parma El Delamberon. It is a linguistic journal. Actually, it's more than linguistic. Vineyard Tengwar is the one that's purely linguistic. Parma El Delamberon dives into some other things. But fantastic resource, especially that particular article in number 17. It has just a ton of words and phrases from The Lord of the Rings.
It kind of sounds like a nice dish that you would order at a fancy
I'll
restaurant.
take a large bowl of a Parma El Delamberon and a side of breadsticks, please. Okay. Now, this Fen Hallen, this closed door, is kept shut at all times except for funerals.
Yeah, and the only people who could use it were the steward or king, one assumes,
Well, yeah,
if
I
they
think
had
that's
one.
probably a given, right?
Yeah. And, of course, the caretakers of the tombs.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it leads to a road, which, well, we're going to get to the name of that road soon enough, that curves down to the place where the tombs of the kings and stewards are.
Yeah, the poor guy in charge of this never used door, an easy job if ever there were one, I would imagine.
Yeah, it seems like it.
Yeah, he's suddenly having the worst day on the job ever.
Oh boy, and it's only going to get worse.
Yeah.
I mean, just spoilers, folks, it's actually going to be his last day on the job, but we'll get to that in a couple more chapters. I really do feel for this guy.
Yeah.
He opens the door for Denethor, and they take his lantern as they walk through, along with, I'm presuming, his milk money. I mean,
Yeah.
this just feels like, I'm taking that. Thank you very much. Wow.
And then after that, we get our first look at this road.
Yeah.
It's dark, running between ancient walls and balusters, and it's quiet enough that their footsteps echo as they walk down.
Oh, man, this place is creepy. And it's old, right? I mean, it's
Ancient, yeah.
Yeah, all the way back to the very beginnings of this city. I mean, the whole city is ancient, but there's something because of the fact that this all has to do with death and with these monuments and tombs and things. It just, there's something about it that's going to feel particularly creepy. It's called the Rath Dinan, the Silent Street. Now, in Tolkien's unfinished index, he glosses this particular street as Rath, meaning street in a city, and we've talked about that before when we encountered Rath Kellerdine, or the Lampright Street, and then Tin, Tin, as silent or quiet, or Tinen, which is silent, and then, of course, that morphs into Dinan in this case, so Rath Dinan.
And it runs between domes and halls, mausoleums, tombs, and the servants carrying Faramir set him down in the house of the stewards.
That's right. And this is when we switch, as you might expect, to Pippin's perspective, to get a look at the inside of this place that we've not been yet, the tomb for the stewards.
Yeah, and it's a large room with a vaulted ceiling, and there are rows and rows of marble tables, each with a sleeping form.
Yeah, a sleeping form. Now, we're not told if these are also carved out of marble, like the tables themselves, stone likenesses, or if these are actually the embalmed bodies of the stewards. Now, certainly Denethor's instructions suggest the strong possibility that that is what we're talking about, that these are embalmed bodies.
And of course, this was a technology that Númenor developed long before the fall. We read in a Calibeth, but the fear of death grew ever darker upon them, and they delayed it by all means that they could. And they began to build great houses for their dead, while their wise men labored unceasingly to discover, if they might, the secret of recalling life, or at the least of the prolonging of men's days. Yet they achieved only the art of preserving incorrupt the dead flesh of men.
Like we talked about earlier, right? This sort of Egyptian reference,
Yes.
almost mummification in a way. And we get another reference to this in the appendices after the death of Aragorn. First we read, "Then going to the house of the kings in the silent street, Aragorn laid him down on the long bed that had been prepared for him." So he was doing the same thing, but in a very different context, right?
Yes.
I mean, he was willingly allowing his life to depart, not
Yes.
seeking to accelerate it. But later, after he passes, we get a description of these sleeping forms. We read this, "And long there he lay, an image of the splendor of the kings of men in glory undimmed before the breaking of the world."
Man, I love that quote.
I still get goosebumps
Yeah,
every
I
time I
know.
read that. Oh my goodness. I'm still, yeah. Ooh, so good.
It's so great. Now, return to the story at hand here. There is one empty table, and Denethor has Faramir laid on it.
Yeah.
And then he lies next to him. The servants then cover them with a single covering, then stand as though they're at a graveside.
Yeah, I mean, this is getting morbid, and Denethor now gives more details of his plan. This is where we really find out what he's got in store here. Earlier, a reader might have taken his words to mean that when they eventually die, like Faramir from this wound-caused fever and Denethor at the hands of the invading forces, he would prefer a pyre to a tomb, right? Maybe it's his way of rejecting that tradition regarding the observation of his death. But now what we saw him imply is made abundantly clear. He intends to burn himself and his son to death in order to die on his own terms.
The servants are told to bring wood and oil and to be prepared to light them on fire. And they're also told to be silent, speak no more to me, thus eliminating the idea that they might try to talk him out of this.
Yeah,
And-
which you'd have to
yeah.
do. I mean,
Right, yeah.
Be prepared to light them on fire. I'm thinking this was not in the job description of guard of the Citadel.
You're right. Yeah.
Can I talk to my HR
I'm sorry,
rep first?
what?
I mean, goodness. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we saw there at the very end of the reading, Pippin takes the leave that Denethor offered him earlier and runs just out of pure terror.
Yeah, absolutely. As would I, as would any sane person at this point. I'm leaving this place. Yeah.
And with that, let's just go ahead and jump right in and see what happens next here. Alan, you want to pick us up?
I will. Poor Faramir, he thought. I must find Gandalf. Poor Faramir. Quite likely he needs medicine more than tears. Oh, where can I find Gandalf? In the thick of things, I suppose, and he will have no time to spare for dying men or madmen. At the door, he turned to one of the servants who had remained on guard there. Your master is not himself, he said. Go slow. Bring no fire to this place while Faramir lives. Do nothing until Gandalf comes. Who is the master of Minas Tirith? The man answered. The Lord Denethor or the Grey Wanderer? The Grey Wanderer or no one, it would seem, said Pippin, and he sped back and up the winding way as swiftly as his feet would carry him, past the astonished porter, out through the door and on till he came near the gate of the citadel. The sentinel halted him as he went by, and he recognized the voice of Baragond. Whither do you run, Master Peregrine? He cried. To find Mithrandir, Pippin answered. The Lord's errands are urgent and should not be hindered by me, said Baragond. But tell me quickly, if you may, what goes forward? Whither has my lord gone? I have just come on duty, but I heard that he passed towards the closed door, and men were bearing Faramir before him. Yes, said Pippin, to the silent street. Baragond bowed his head to hide his tears. They said that he was dying, he sighed, and now he is dead. No, said Pippin, not yet. And even now his death might be prevented, I think. But the lord of the city, Baragond, has fallen before his city is taken. He is fey and dangerous. Quickly he told of Denethor's strange words and deeds. I must find Gandalf at once. Then you must go down to the battle. I know. The Lord has given me leave. But Beregond, if you can, do something to stop any dreadful thing happening. The Lord does not permit those who wear the black and silver to leave their post for any cause, save at his own command. Well, you must choose between orders and the life of Faramir, said Pippin. And as for orders, I think you have a madman to deal with, not a lord. I must run. I will return if I can. He ran on, down towards the outer city. Men flying back from the burning past him, and some, seeing his livery, turned and shouted, but he paid no heed. At last he was through the second gate, beyond which great fires leaped up between the walls. Yet it seemed strangely silent. No noise or shouts of battle or din of arms could be heard. Then, suddenly, there was a dreadful cry, and a great shock, and a deep, echoing boom. Forcing himself on against a gust of fear and horror that shook him almost to his knees, Pippin turned a corner opening on the wide place behind the city gate. He stopped dead. He had found Gandalf, but he shrank back, cowering into a shadow. Oh, man. It's getting intense, isn't it?
It's about to hit the fan, I think.
It's getting real, folks. It is getting real. Yeah.
Now, in this passage, Pippin's immediate thoughts are, understandably, for Faramir.
Yeah, as they should, right?
Yeah, and he wants to get Faramir the help he needs. Medicine, not tears, definitely not fire, and he needs Gandalf right now.
Yeah, he does, but he speculates, rightly, that Gandalf's going to be in the middle of the fight. He's not in the library looking for the most recent research on siege engines from Gondor. You know?
Right, yeah. And so Pippin tells one of the 6 servants the obvious. Denethor is not in his right mind here.
Yeah.
And he says to wait until Gandalf arrives before doing anything rash, let's say.
Seems like good advice, like, I don't know, lighting a fire beneath 2 living men. Yeah.
That would cover it, yeah.
I would say so, but the servant, frankly, seems rather unmoved, despite having seen the exact same things that Pippin has just seen.
And by the way he asks the question, it implies that he'll follow Denethor's orders because Denethor's the one in charge.
That's right. I'm just following orders. But Pippin's departing line is a really good one. Essentially, Denethor isn't even master of himself right now, so he sure as heck can't be the master of the city. I buy that argument.
Yeah, that sounds solid to me.
Yeah.
So Pippin runs back up the road, past Fenhallen, and to the gate of the citadel, where he recognizes the voice of Beregond hailing him.
Yeah, good old Beregond.
Yeah, and hey, friendly voice. That comes in handy right about now.
Sure does.
Beregond asks him where he's running to, and Pippin answers him directly. Going to Gandalf.
Exactly. Where else am I going to go? Beregond, and I get why he does this, right? He assumes that Pippin is going to find Gandalf on Denethor's orders. Pippin is Denethor's personal esquire, so that must be why he's going there. But he does ask for a little bit of news. Hey, I know you're in a hurry. Obviously, Denethor's told you to go find Gandalf. What goes forward? I love that. That's really, what's going on, man? What's up? What goes forward?
That's the Middle-earth version of what's up. Yeah.
Exactly. What's going on? Where's Denethor gone? I have heard some disturbing news, some rumors about the closed door and Faramir.
Yeah, and Pippin's able to confirm this, which leads Beregond to the assumption that Faramir has in fact already died.
Exactly.
And Pippin says, no, you don't understand. He's still alive.
Yeah.
And I think he could be saved.
That's right. Denethor is the one who has fallen. No, he's not dead, but he has fallen. And I really like that analogy. He is fey and dangerous. Now, fey. We've talked about fey before. First used in The Lord of the Rings to describe Frodo's mood in running heedlessly to meet the enemies on the other side of Shelob's lair. And then this season, it's been used by Éowyn to describe Aragorn before he heads to the paths of the dead. Éomer uses the word, again, similarly to describe Aragorn.
Yeah, and we'll actually see Fey come up another couple times pretty soon here. It's used to describe both Theoden as he led the charge of the Rohirrim and of Éomer after he believed the battle was lost.
Yeah, and that actually is probably the one that is most comparable to this, right? Because we're talking about situations where essentially hope has been lost.
Yeah.
Éomer at that point does think he sees the end beyond all doubt.
Right. Yeah.
But he's going to make it a better end, you know?
Yes. It's an important difference.
A very,
between the two
very important
situations.
difference. Exactly. We'll keep talking about that. So Pippin, of course, brings Baragond up to speed on what's happening. And that leads Baragond to conclude what Pippin's already concluded: find Gandalf. He's the only one who can help you. Pippin agrees that this is the priority, but he asks Baragond to do something to stop any dreadful thing happening.
And we see Baragond's first response is to fall back on the rules. I'm a guard of the Tower of Minas Tirith. I'm not allowed to leave my post unless Denethor himself commands it.
Oh, man. And then we get this, right? We get as clear a statement as we possibly get in the Legendarium, as clear a statement as Tolkien can make, that sometimes the right thing to do is to disobey the orders and to obey a higher duty. And he says it explicitly: you're going to have to choose between orders and the life of Faramir.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then he strengthens that case, frankly, by arguing you don't have a lord anymore. You don't have somebody worthy of being the leader, of being essentially a king. I mean, a king in all but name. You have a madman. Remember, we talked about this earlier. It's not just that Denethor is showing that he's unstable, that he's really lost it. He has abandoned his post as the steward. He's abandoned his responsibilities. He's broken his oath. He really is no longer Lord, is he?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, it really makes for a nice gray mess of an area that Baragond finds himself in right now.
Yeah, it really, really does. But that leads us to a sidebar, a really important sidebar on disobeying orders.
Yeah, and you've talked about this at length before, first in episode 164 when you were critical of Haldir's decision to blindfold Gimli.
Yeah.
And contrasting his "I'm just following the rules" approach with Éomer's decision to let the three hunters go and actually help them in episode 187.
Exactly. So folks, if you want to kind of dive into this issue of following orders versus exercising a little bit of discretion, look at those episodes, 164, 187, and then look again at episode 204 when it comes up. That is the one where Hama allows Gandalf to go into the Golden Hall with his staff. His line at the time is, "Yet in doubt, a man of worth will trust to his own wisdom." And that episode is when we quoted Tom Shippey from The Road to Middle-earth, and I want to bring that up here. He compares that whole scene with a similar scene in Beowulf. And he said that Tolkien was using the modern narrative form to explain things to us as modern readers that would have frankly been obvious to Anglo-Saxons. And here are Shippey's words. "In particular, the truths that freedom is not a prerogative of democracies, and that in free societies, orders give way to discretion. Hama takes a risk with Gandalf. So does the Coast Guard with Beowulf. So does Éomer with Aragorn, letting him go free and lending him horses. He is under arrest when Aragorn reappears, and Theoden notes Hama's dereliction of duty, too. Still, the nice thing about the writers, one might say, is that though a stern people loyal to their lord, they wear duty and loyalty lightly. Hama and Éomer make their own decisions, and even the suspicious gate ward wishes Gandalf luck." Now, before you go on, I want to point out that thing about the writers is that they wear duty and loyalty lightly. I think that's a very strong distinction. Because Gondor, much more formal, much more structured, it's very clear that the soldiers do not wear their duty and loyalty lightly, and they don't feel like they can have orders give way to discretion.
That's right. And it's interesting, too, not to give too much away, but seeing the consequences for what we're going to see Baragond do, he actually does have some consequences that are more strict, like even under Aragorn. So it's kind of interesting to see, but that doesn't change the fact of what he does to be the right thing by helping Faramir in this case. Then, of course, there's the far more recent and more relevant example than the writers here, and that's the example of Faramir.
Oh, yeah,
he was under orders to slay any he found in Ithilien that weren't explicitly of Gondor.
Right.
And instead of slaying them or returning them to Denethor, he helped them, knowing that his life might be forfeit as a result.
Exactly. And you touched on this, but I want to follow up on it. What's important about all of these examples is that the person who trusted to his own wisdom, as Hama put it, or who decided that orders give way to discretion, as Shippey said, did so with the knowledge that they would face consequences for their decision. It may be the right thing to do, but it doesn't mean that it's going to come without a price.
Now, back to the text, Pippin runs down level after level, ignoring the shouts of soldiers who see his uniform and know where he belongs.
That's right.
Remember, he's a guard of the Citadel, not just some run-of-the-mill Minas Tirith soldier.
That's important, right? I mean, he's wearing the livery of the tower. That silver and black. When somebody sees him down on the third level, they know you're not supposed to be here, man.
Yeah, what's going on?
Right, you're a guard of the Citadel. So now he's made it all the way down to the first level of the city, but it is oddly and creepily quiet, and there's no fighting. No sound of weapons can be heard.
Then he hears what's described as a dreadful cry and the deep echoing boom. And we know what this is, even though the text hasn't brought us there quite yet.
I know. We've seen this in a few other occasions, but this chapter in particular does a good job of weaving it all. He's doing this fantastic job of taking these individual timelines and bringing them together in a way that just builds and builds and builds tension for the reader.
Yeah. And we see Pippin has to force himself, summoning all his will to fight against a sense of fear and horror.
And he does. I think that's the amazing thing. We talked earlier about Pippin's maturity and his growth. This is the same Pippin that we've often laughed at through the story. He is overcoming fear generated by the Witch King himself at his most fearsome.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the way Tolkien describes this, forcing himself on against a gust of fear and horror. It's sort of like, you see these videos when there's a hurricane of some journalist out there on the street and they're like stumbling, leaning forward, trying to stabilize themselves against, 100-mile-an-hour winds.
Yeah.
Imagine that, but in a spiritual sense, in a sense of this fear just overwhelming your soul. And Pippin forces himself forward. It almost shook him to his knees, but he keeps going.
Yeah. It's enough gust of fear to turn your emotional umbrella inside out.
It really is. Well, that's a great way to put it. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he does eventually get to the point where he can't keep going further anymore, right? He's arrived at the plaza. He's found Gandalf, all right. And that is where we're going to pick up for you. You're going to skip a paragraph because we have to, but boy, get to the arrival of this thing. Oh, man.
All right. The drums rolled louder. Fires leaped up. Great engines crawled across the field. And in the midst was a huge ram, great as a forest tree 100 feet in length, swinging on mighty chains. Long had it been in the forging in the dark smithies of Mordor, and its hideous head, founded of black steel, was shaped in the likeness of a ravening wolf. On it spells of ruin lay. Grond, they named it, in memory of the hammer of the underworld of old. Great beasts drew it. Orcs surrounded it, and behind walked mountain trolls to wield it. But about the gate resistance still was stout, and there the knights of Dol Amroth and the hardiest of the garrison stood at bay. Shot and dart fell thick. Siege towers crashed or blazed suddenly like torches. All before the walls on either side of the gate, the ground was choked with wreck and with bodies of the slain. Yet still driven as by a madness, more and more came up. Grond crawled on. Upon its housing no fire would catch, and though now and again some great beast that hauled it would go mad and spread stamping ruin among the orcs innumerable that guarded it, their bodies were cast aside from its path, and others took their place. Grond crawled on. The drums rolled wildly. Over the hills of slain a hideous shape appeared. A horseman, tall, hooded, cloaked in black. Slowly, trampling the fallen, he rode forth, heeding no longer any dart. He halted and held up a long pale sword. And as he did, so a great fear fell on all, defender and foe alike, and the hands of men drooped to their sides, and no bow sang. For a moment, all was still. The drums rolled and rattled. With a vast rush, Grond was hurled forward by huge hands. It reached the gate. It swung. A deep boom rumbled through the city like thunder running in the clouds. But the doors of iron and posts of steel withstood the stroke. Then the black captain rose in his stirrups and cried aloud in a dreadful voice, speaking in some forgotten tongue words of power and terror to rend both heart and stone. Thrice he cried, thrice the great ram boomed, and suddenly, upon the last stroke, the gate of Gondor broke. As if stricken by some blasting spell, it burst asunder. There was a flash of searing lightning, and the doors tumbled in riven fragments to the ground.
Oh, man. Thank you, Matt, for a fantastic, fantastic reading.
Oh, I love Grond Crawled On.
Grond Crawled On, and we're going to get to that because, man, Tolkien does something fantastic with that. But let's go back first to the paragraph that we had to skip. We read there that the assault on the city has gone on for hours now, and the enemy is pressing the walls. And now the Mumakil from Harad are pulling the siege engines even closer. And like Bret said earlier, this might not be the wisest use of war elephants, right, in terms of their tendency to panic. But hey, it's the Witch King, and it's not like he cares if a platoon of orcs gets squished.
Yeah, he cares absolutely not at all. And in fact, that's precisely what we read next. He cared not greatly what they did or how many might be slain.
Mm-hmm.
Their only purpose is to help the Witch King accurately determine the strength of the defense and to keep the men of the city occupied.
That's right.
And all of those are distractions because the main effort is at the gate itself.
And of course it is, because the Witch King knows full well that the wall is virtually, if not practically, impenetrable. And as a result, he knows the gate is the weakest point, and that is where he's going to pour all his strength.
And as the drums get louder and the fires grow, siege engines make their way along. And in the middle of all of them is Grond.
Oh, Grond. Can I just say, though, that when you started to read that, I always, my brain tends to think of funny things. So fires leaped up, great engines crawled across the field. I'm picturing like a 5-liter V8. I'm picturing a Ferrari flat 12, a Porsche Boxer 6, crawling across the field. And then in the midst was a huge ram, and I'm picturing a big sheep with his horns that's 100 feet long.
Not the truck, the Ram truck. With all those cars Dodge running Ram around, truck. You don't have the truck?
No, because, of course, we're sponsored by Ford of Bruinen. All right. I'm so sorry for that. Folks, you can, next time you listen to it, you can skip that so that you can skip the bad joke. So, Grond, 100 feet long, like Bret said, far longer than any real world battering ram, swung on huge chains and with this black steel head shaped like a wolf's head, which, by the way, is really appropriate for Sauron. Remember, he's the Lord of Werewolves.
Yeah, and it's named in memory of the hammer of the underworld of old.
Now, for those of you who might not remember the underworld of old, this is named after the mace that Morgoth used back when he fought Fingolfin, the High King of the Noldor, back in First Age 456. And this is where... No, I'm going to wait. I'll bring this up in just a little bit. But Grond is pulled by great beasts, and mountain trolls are walking behind it to use it, right? To pull it back on its chains and let it fly.
Yeah, but as one might expect, given the importance of the gate, the fighting there is intense.
Oh, yeah.
The defense has not conceded. It's manned by Imrahil's Knights of Dol Amroth, along with the toughest soldiers that remained in the first level.
Yeah.
And the fighting results in siege towers being leveled, bodies of the dead just piling up.
Everywhere. But Grond crawled on. And that's, I want to talk about that phrase because it is so powerful, right?
Yeah.
He leads this paragraph and the next with that 3-word sentence. Grond crawled on. And it creates this sense of inevitable doom. But I realize as we're talking this through, right, we mentioned the mace named Grond earlier. that moment when we meet the first Grond, when Morgoth used it to fight Fingolfin. Do you remember Tolkien did this exact same thing and Morgoth came?
Yeah.
And then he repeats it again and Morgoth came. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. The repetition, the 3-word sentence, the connection to Grond. It is amazing.
That's great. Yeah.
Amazing.
Man, I just love this section because you get all this stuff happen. You know, there's so much action here, and you actually get some, you know, the good guys are actually having some stuff go their way. Like they're bringing down siege stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like we know the effect that Imrahil has on his soldiers, just like we said earlier with Gandalf. It's a very similar effect, but the way Tolkien frames it, like it's none of that matters. Like Grond, it does not phase Grond whatsoever.
No,
Grond
crawled on, and Grond is going to keep on crawling on, and you're not going to be able to stop the crawling of said Grond. Yeah, it really is that inevitable doom.
Yeah. And somehow the housing is resistant to fire.
I know.
Perhaps it's covered with plates of iron or water-soaked hides, something like that.
Yeah.
And of course, that might stop the fire, but it doesn't stop some of the great beasts from running off and crushing even more orcs.
Of course, which the Witch King doesn't care about.
Yeah.
But of course, that is the great beast running off, doesn't stop Grond from crawling on. Grond crawled on.
Yeah.
And now we see him. Now we see him in his full glory is the wrong word, but we see the captain of despair.
Oh, there is something glorious about a great villain,
isn't it?
Though. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There really is.
We could say full glory because
this is a pretty
great
much
villain. Yeah.
Full on amazing appearance right here. Yeah.
Yes. So he's tall, hooded, all in black, on his horse, going slowly over the bodies of the dead.
Again, not really caring. I mean, he's, I don't care. Orcs, people, whatever. Stomp, stomp. And when he holds up his sword, the fear that emanates from him at this moment, and this is what Pippin just experienced a little while ago, is so intense that everyone, orcs, trolls, men, the one little hobbit over there, simply stand transfixed in a moment of intense silence.
With the sound of drums bringing that silence to an end, Grond is pushed to the gate and swung, striking the doors for the first time.
And that's when the Witch King stands up in his stirrups, which makes me think of the other time we see him stand up in his stirrups, which was at the Ford of Bruinen, when he stood up in his stirrups and spoke something that, broke Frodo's sword. And, man. So he stands up and he speaks a powerful spell of breaking. And he does this 3 times, and Grond is swung 3 times, for a total of 4, right? Because he didn't say anything before the first strike. So it hits 4 times.
And on that last hit, the gate breaks.
Yeah.
Not just as a gate might break, but we're told it burst asunder.
Yeah.
And that obviously points to more evidence of magic. This flash of lightning, obviously. That's a big clue right there that there's
clue
magic
number 1.
at play.
Yeah, exactly.
And as Hammond and Skull point out, this moment is just over 24 hours since the arrival of Sauron's forces at Minas Tirith. This has gone quite quickly.
Very quickly.
As they say, Sauron relies on force of arms and technology, but also on sorcery, on spells of ruin laid on the Ram, and words of power and terror spoken by the Lord of the Nazgul.
But just for fun, let's talk a little science here. I mean, that's what we do sometimes about the amount of force hitting these doors aside from the magic. I mean, not that we can ignore the magic, mind you. I have a feeling that the magic was essential. And so now I'm going to give you an idea of what the doors might survive without the magic. Let's assume the Witch King had cut a tree down in Ithilien because Mordor doesn't really have a lot of vegetation left. And thankfully, the text gives us a lot of the trees that grow in Ithilien. We read that there are resinous trees, fir, cedar, cypress, groves and thickets of tamarisk and terebinth, olive trees, bay, great ilexes, which is a holly tree of huge girth, ash trees, and giant oaks. Now, here's the thing. Of those, there are a few that might have grown to a height large enough to provide a straight log of 100 feet in length. But let's go with one of the giant oaks. So I've done some research. I've done some calculations. I've done my homework on this, folks. If you use an online calculator for estimating log weight, an oak log that's 100 feet in length and 5 feet in diameter, which is not that big when you think about a 100-foot long log. It's not going to be skinny, but 5 feet in diameter. That log of oak would weigh nearly 120,000 pounds. That's 60 tons of wood. And then you add the wolf's head made out of iron, conservatively another 5 tons or so. That amount of mass, now I have to go to another calculator, that amount of mass striking a stationary gate at even a relatively slow speed of, say, 5 meters per second, right? They draw the thing back. They draw Grond back in its chains and let it go. Assuming it strikes at a speed of 5 meters per second, that would result in an impact of nearly 800 kilojoules. Now, to give you an idea of what that is, a stick of dynamite releases a little bit more, releases a megajoule, 1,000 kilojoules of energy when it explodes, but it sends that energy all around it in a 360-degree sphere. This is nearly the force of a stick of dynamite, but all of that force being directed at a single spot on the gate with each of those 4 strikes of Grond.
Wow, that is some impressive nerdery there, Alan, I must say.
I do that kind of thing. It's just fun to kind of figure this stuff out, you know? 100-foot-long battering ram. Dude.
Yeah. Massive. And I love that, as you alluded to, we're doing a live recording right now. And I'm seeing so many memes pop up in the chat of various math GIFs and stuff, which I absolutely love because that feels like what we're doing here. But man,
it is,
yeah. And like you said, whereas with an explosion like dynamite, it's emanating in all directions, whereas this is very clearly focused on a single point.
Exactly.
Wow. Yeah.
So much force.
Yeah. And we're going to see the aftermath of the gate bursting asunder. Alan, could you finish off the chapter for us?
Oh, with pleasure, but also with a little bit of anxiety. This is one of my favorite passages in all of the Legendarium, and I'm hopeful that I can do it some justice. All right. In rode the Lord of the Nazgul. A great black shape against the fires beyond he loomed up, grown to a vast menace of despair. In rode the Lord of the Nazgul, under the archway that no enemy ever yet had passed, and all fled before his face. All save one. There, waiting, silent and still in the space before the gate, sat Gandalf upon Shadowfax. Shadowfax, who alone among the free horses of the earth endured the terror, unmoving, steadfast as a graven image in rock demon. "You cannot enter here," said Gandalf, and the huge shadow halted. "Go back to the abyss prepared for you. Go back! Fall into the nothingness that awaits you and your master. Go!" The Black Rider flung back his hood, and behold, he had a kingly crown, and yet upon no head visible was it set. The red fires shone between it and the mantled shoulders, vast and dark. From a mouth unseen there came a deadly laughter. "Old fool," he said. "Old fool, this is my hour. Do you not know death when you see it? Die now and curse in vain." And with that he lifted high his sword, and flames ran down the blade. Gandalf did not move. And in that very moment, away behind in some courtyard of the city, the cock crowed. Shrill and clear he crowed, recking nothing of wizardry or war, welcoming only the morning that in the sky far above the shadows of death was coming with the dawn. And as if in answer, there came from far away another note. Horns, horns, horns! In dark Mindalluin's sides they dimly echoed, great horns of the north wildly blowing. Rohan had come at last.
I love it.
I still get chills.
Every time.
I still get chills. Good heavens, man. That's just...
Yeah, man. After all of the, downward trend of despair and just darkness, I love how that chapter ends. And it just... Man, you immediately want to go to the next page.
You do. You just want to keep turning and keep turning. Oh, man, it's so good. I especially love the part when we read about Gandalf's staff being broken. Oh, wait. No, sorry. We'll get to that. We'll get to that. But yeah, I got to say that was one of my favorite things to read ever. I cannot wait until we read at the end of the next chapter.
Right.
But wow. That is such a moment.
Yeah, these two chapters back to back are just incredible. Possibly my favorite, back to back chapters in all of Tolkien's works.
Almost certainly for me. Yeah, I agree.
And so let's go back to the beginning of what you read here. We start by seeing the same technique that Tolkien used with Grond crawled on, used to great effect again here. In rode the Lord of the Nazgul.
Yeah.
Repeated in identical phrasing, creating that same sense of inevitability and tension.
Exactly. I mean, I know it's not the 3-word phrase like Grond crawled on or and Morgoth came that we observed earlier, but the repetition in such close proximity and with the exact same phrase really does build that same sense of that inevitable doom. And that despair that his presence creates is at its most intense right now, which again, I think really tells us how brave Pippin was. But
absolutely.
He does something now that no enemy has done in the 3,100 years of Minas Tirith's existence. He walks through the gates.
Yeah, I love the gravity of that. That moment.
It is played so well by Tolkien.
Is.
I mean, he really emphasizes that enough for us to understand this is not...
This is never
It's not like 500 years ago somebody else defeated the city.
Yeah.
Man.
So we see everyone has run away out of sheer terror of this vast menace of despair, except for one. And I love how he says, all save one.
Yes.
And that is Gandalf upon Shadowfax.
Oh, man, Shadowfax. Unlike in the films, Shadowfax does not panic and throw Gandalf in the face of the Witch King or his steed, which for now, by the way, is a horse, not the pterodactyl-like creature that we'll see him ride later in the Battle of the Pelennor Fields after Rohan's arrival.
Yeah. In fact, here in the book, Shadowfax is described as unmoving and steadfast and like a statue.
I love that reference to the statues in Rothdenen right there.
Yeah,
because
we just read about. Yes. And Gandalf makes a simple statement. You cannot enter here.
Oh, I love that. This is not, I forbid it. This is not, you may not. And this is not even, you shall not. This is a statement of fact. It is just like he did when he spoke to Saruman, telling him his staff was broken, and it was.
Yeah, and just as he did when he spoke to the Balrog, telling him the exact same thing. You cannot pass.
Correct. Absolutely correct. This isn't anything other than a statement of fact, and I love it. And Gandalf wields authority here, right? He wielded authority when he spoke to the Balrog, too, and said, you cannot pass. But now he wields an increased authority because it's authority from Iluvatar himself upon his return. It's an amazing moment. Yeah.
And following up on that authority, he tells the Witch King of Angmar, the captain of despair, to go back to the abyss, to fall into the nothingness that awaits him and Sauron, to which the Witch King has a response.
Oh, yes, he does. I think it's interesting, by the way, and I don't know if this is intentional. I know Tolkien almost never did anything by accident, but I'm wondering, here he's referred to as the Black Rider. We haven't seen that phrase referring to the Witch King in a very long time. I know we've probably seen it at some point other than the one I'm thinking of, but it brings us back to the time when it was the first name that we saw applied to the Nazgul, back when we encountered them in the Shire, all the way back at the beginning of book 1. Somehow I feel like Tolkien's tying this moment to that moment in some way. I'm not sure how. I'm not sure why, but I think there's a reason why he doesn't call him the Witch King or the Captain of Despair. He calls him the Black Rider.
It makes me wonder, have we seen the Witch King on a horse since then?
You know, on a regular horse, you're right. That's an interesting point. We haven't seen them on horses since the Ford of Bruinen.
Yeah. So maybe that's the Black Rider aspect.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Well, whatever the case, this guy, the Black Rider, the Captain of Despair, the Witch King of Angmar, throws back his hood and reveals a crown. But it's on an invisible head, and man, this is a creepy moment.
Yeah.
You can see the fires of the battlefield between the crown and the shoulders.
Yeah.
Ah, man.
I love that imagery. And if that's not enough, he laughs a terrifying and deadly laugh before replying to Gandalf's claim of authority.
Oh,
and
yeah.
We see he totally disrespects Gandalf in this moment.
Oh, yeah. Old fool. Yeah.
Yeah. He claims his time has come and threatens death before lifting his sword.
And as I hinted at earlier, when this happens, we note specifically that Gandalf's staff does not break Sir Peter Jackson. No, Gandalf does not move at all, neither does Shadowfax.
Then, in a moment which brings me chills, a cock crows.
Every time, man. Every time.
And I love this moment. It always drives the point home to me. And Tolkien reminds us in this tiny sentence that there are beings who don't know or care about these things like wizardry or war, and for whom life goes on until it doesn't.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I love that. I also love the little bit of alliteration we get there. I mean, obviously a cock crowed, but then we also get wizardry or war, welcoming. And we've been seeing a little bit of that, you know, here and there. There have been some other moments, but keep your eye out for that, folks. So finally, we get to the moment that we have been waiting for. This moment that, for me at least, is always the one that raises the hairs on my arms. The horns of Rohan echoing in the side of the mountain. And, you know, just a couple episodes ago, you and I were talking about this in our Meanwhile Elsewhere in Middle-earth intro. It was a different context. We were talking about that moment of near repentance for Gollum and how it moved Tolkien personally, because that happened. That moment was on that day. In it, we quoted letter number 165, and I'm going to quote that again here. But now, Tolkien says, certain features of The Lord of the Rings, and especially certain places, still move me very powerfully. The heart remains in the description of Caren Amroth, but I am most stirred by the sound of the horses of the Rohirrim at Cockcrow. So am I, Professor. So am I.
I think the vast majority of us are.
Yeah, absolutely.
We see Tom Shippey comments on this moment in The Road to Middle-earth, telling us that challenging horns echo through northern stories. From the trumpets of Higelac, Beowulf's uncle, coming to rescue his dispirited compatriots from death by torture, to the war horns of the forest cantons, lowing to each other across the field, as the Swiss pikemen rallied in the night against overwhelming numbers of French cavalry and cannon.
Yeah. Now, I have to admit, and I think Bret mentioned this, it might not be the most tactically sound thing to let your enemy know you've arrived by blowing the horns, but here's the thing. It does wonders for the force being relieved, and you can just imagine and feel, really, the joy and hope coming to the hearts of the men of the city of Minas Tirith at this point. Everybody but Denethor, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, and it does wonders for how awesome it leads into the next chapter as well.
Isn't it? I know. It is a perfect segue. Now, away behind in some courtyard of the city, a cock crowed, and Barlaman woke up to sort the mail. What does Barlaman have in the mailbag for us tonight, Matt?
Joanna, and sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, writes in, do we have any indication of how the meeting, or confrontation, went between Saruman and the Nazgul who visited him at the end of Book 3. We know that Gandalf was predicting that it wouldn't go well for Saruman, since it was highly unlikely that anybody would believe that not only that they captured the wrong hobbits, but that his Uruk-hai were slain and the hobbits escaped, and that his lackey threw the palantir out of a window, then a hobbit decided to look through it. But we don't get any more information later on, neither from Treebeard nor from Saruman, as far as I know. Is there anything? Alan?
That is a good question. We go from one confrontation between a Nazgul and a wizard to another confrontation between a Nazgul and a wizard. It's almost like we planned it that way, man.
How about that?
It is a good question. And while, as is often the case, we're not given exact details, we certainly have some idea about what happened between the Nazgul and Saruman, both before the story begins, and I think that's important to set the stage, and that's thanks to Unfinished Tales and the section The Hunt for the Ring, as well as that confrontation itself from the text of The Lord of the Rings, plus, of course, a healthy dose of reasonable speculation. Matt, do you want to go ahead and start with what happened earlier?
Absolutely. So after the Nazgul went searching for Gollum and the Shire in all the wrong places, they went back to Sauron. They had just learned about the prophecy heard in Gondor, as well as Saruman's capture of Gandalf. He figured that meant that no one actually had the ring, but that Saruman knew where it was. So he sent his ring wraiths to Isengard. 2 days after Gandalf had departed from Orthanc, the Lord of Morgul halted before the gate of Isengard. Then Saruman, already filled with wrath and fear by the escape of Gandalf, perceived the peril of standing between enemies, a known traitor to both. His dread was great, for his hope of deceiving Sauron, or at the least of receiving his favor in victory, was utterly lost. Now either he himself must gain the ring, or come to ruin and torment. But he was wary and cunning still, and he had ordered Isengard against just such an evil chance. The circle of Isengard was too strong for even the Lord of Morgul and his company to assail without great force of war. Therefore, to his challenge and demands, he receives only the answer of the voice of Saruman that spoke by some art as though it came from the gate itself. "It is not a land that you look for," it said. "I know what you seek, though you do not name it. I have it not, as surely its servants perceive without telling. For if I had it, then you would bow before me and call me Lord. And if I knew where this thing was hid, I should not be here, but long gone before you to take it. There is one only whom I guess to have this knowledge, Mithrandir, enemy of Sauron. And since it is but 2 days since he departed from Isengard, seek him nearby." Such was still the power of the voice of Saruman that even the Lord of the Nazgul did not question what it said, whether it was false or short of the full truth, but straight away he rode from the gate and began to hunt for Gandalf in Rohan.
Excellent. Thank you for reading that. I love that. Saruman's voice, persuasive enough to pull one over on the Witch King himself. That is really impressive, Saruman, I have to say. Good job. So the riders then head to Rohan. That's where they encounter Wormtongue, who they flip into a double agent of sorts. He tells them how to find the Shire, and they go on with their search. So now that we've got that background, we fast forward a bit to chapter 11 of Book 3, the Palantir. Pippin has looked into the stone earlier that night, and he sees a winged Nazgul flying towards him, dispatched from Barad-dûr. But then a different winged Nazgul flew over Dol Baran, prompting Gandalf to grab him and hit the road. Now, later, Pippin asks Gandalf, "But it was not coming from me, was it?" And of course, the one he saw on the Palantir wasn't. Gandalf explains the distance and time involved make that totally impossible. But then Gandalf tells us what we need to know to answer this question. "But Saruman certainly looked in the stone since the orc raid, and more of his secret thought, I do not doubt, has been read than he intended. A messenger has been sent to find out what he is doing, and after what has happened tonight, another will come, I think, and swiftly. So Saruman will come to the last pinch of the vice that he has put his hand in. He has no captive to send. He has no stone to see with, and cannot answer the summons. Sauron will only believe that he is withholding the captive and refusing to use the stone. It will not help Saruman to tell the truth to the messenger, for Isengard may be ruined, yet he is still safe in Orthanc. So whether he will or no, he will appear a rebel. Yet he rejected us, so as to avoid that very thing. What he will do in such a plight I cannot guess. He has power still, I think, while in Orthanc, to resist the 9 riders. And that is precisely what would have happened. I mean, in the text you read, we read specifically that the circle of Isengard was too strong for even the Lord of Morgul and his company to assail without great force of war. Orthanc's even stronger. So the first Nazgul, the one that flew over Dol Baran, would have arrived only to find that Saruman, A, doesn't have the ring, B, doesn't have the hobbit that looked in the stone, C, doesn't have the stone anymore, D, doesn't have an army anymore, and E is essentially trapped in Orthanc surrounded by Ents. So he would go back with a report. The second one that came out, triggered by Pippin looking into the stone, he would also learn the same thing. So Sauron would get the report and know what he already knew, which is that Saruman was a traitor.
Yeah, but they couldn't get him out by force, not out of Orthanc.
No way.
Remember that even the Ents hurling stones at it, tearing it and beating on it, couldn't make the slightest dent.
Right.
He's not going anywhere. Certainly not with the Nazgul.
No, he's not.
And given the fact that we later see Saruman in the story, no, he didn't die by falling off the top of Orthanc.
Thank you, Sir Peter Jackson. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. It's clear that whatever happened in that confrontation, Saruman was not captured or killed, and no Nazgul were trapped, killed, or had their flying steeds destroyed.
Which is unfortunate, but yeah. Now, we do get a glimpse later on of what Sauron intends to have done with Saruman. This is an interesting little tidbit. In the negotiation between the mouth of Sauron and the forces led by Aragorn at the Black Gate, the mouth of Sauron lays out the terms of surrender. One of those terms is, "They shall help to rebuild Isengard, which they have wantonly destroyed, and that shall be Sauron's, and there his lieutenant shall dwell, not Saruman, but one more worthy of trust."
Yeah, the mouth of Sauron has his eyes on that real estate.
Yeah, he does, absolutely. Location, location.
That's right. And that's about all we have, though. And I have to admit, I'd love to have overheard that conversation between the Nazgul and Saruman.
It's like the ultimate version of the dog ate my homework, really.
Yeah.
I don't have the ring. I don't have the hobbits. All my special orcs are dead, killed by trees. Isengard has been ripped to shreds, as you can see, by, well, not trees, but tree-like creatures. And I can't tell your boss that on Zoom because I don't have the stone. My servant threw it at the King of Rohan. And it was Gandalf that picked it up. He's now the head of my order. In fact, I'm not even in the order anymore. I don't have a staff either. I'm just an old guy at a tower. Leave me alone. Get off my lawn. I mean, that poor guy. I feel so bad for him.
Yeah.
It's just one thing after the other. Everything has gone wrong. Everything.
And the fact that, like, when you dive deeper into Tolkien's works and discover how long Saruman has been working on this plan to, like, get the ring himself, you realize,
I know.
Wow, how the mighty have fallen.
With every possible way. That's hilarious. Well, folks, that does wrap it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Be sure to join us again next week when I am joined by Marcel, the Tolkienist, for the PPP's annual Tolkien Reading Day special. Now, this year's theme is travel and adventure, so it should be a fun one. But before we wrap up, I just want to take a minute to genuinely thank you, Matt. Hosting 5 episodes with the Nerd of the Rings himself has been a real pleasure and privilege. I'm thankful for the time that you've spent here in the common room with me and our PPP family.
Well, Alan, I got to say the pleasure and privilege is all mine. I've, loved yours and Sean's work for a long time, and being a small part of this has been a lot of fun, especially the live episodes like we're doing here tonight with the folks in the chat. It's been great.
So much fun. It really is.
Now, folks, Alan and I want to thank the members of Team PPP. Editor Jordan Rennells, Barlaman Becca Davis, Social Media Manager Casey Hilsey, Event and Patreon Community Coordinator Katie McKenna, Graphic Artist Megan Collins, and Website Guru Phil Dean.
Now, speaking of the website, please make sure to give us a visit there at theprancingponypodcast.com. We've got show notes, hilarious outtakes, including probably eventually some from tonight.
I've given you plenty.
Prancing Pony Ponderings and our online storefront, where you can get all sorts of PPP merch.
You'll also want to visit our library page. The Prancing Pony podcast is, first and foremost, a podcast about the books. So if you're interested in a book we've mentioned on the show, you'll find a link for it in our library. The PPP gets a small amount of compensation when you make your purchase, and we thank you for that.
Indeed we do. And we also want to thank our patrons at the Kierdan's contribution tier. I'm going to start with DeMay in Alaska, and then James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, Chad in Texas, Lance in New Jersey, Paul in Colorado, Jerry in Texas, B in California, Joseph in Texas, Kathy from North Carolina, Lori from Washington, Carlos in California, Brian in the UK, Ned from Connecticut, Jerry from Washington, Joe in Washington, and Erwin from the Netherlands.
There's also Dylan in Australia, Ben in Minnesota, Anthony in Texas, Karen in the UK, Zaksu in Illinois, Brian in Texas, Sarah in New Jersey, June in Ireland, Joshua in Massachusetts, Lucy in Texas, Connor in North Carolina, Keith in Alabama, Carson in Oklahoma, Vivian in California, and James in Massachusetts. Thank you all so very much for your support.
Indeed, thank you so much.
Make sure you don't miss any episodes of the Prancing Pony podcast. Subscribe now through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or your favorite podcast app.
One last thing as always, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and most of all, your horns to barliman@theprancingponypodcast.com. Now, if you want your voice or horns literally heard, well, just send us audio of your question. Visit podinbox.com/prancingponypod and record your question for us.
Please be sure to still email the question to Barliman. Even though Barliman's been a lot more reliable lately, there's still a lot of mail to sort through. We'll try to get you in just as soon as we're able.
As always, this has been far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners and co-hosts. But until next time.
This is the end. We are going. We are leaving now. Goodbye.